This is Cybersecurity Distilled with Andy Bennett.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next episode of Cybersecurity Distilled, a show designed to break down the complex problems, concepts, and technologies facing cybersecurity professionals today, while exploring the complex flavors of our favorite distilled spirits, one of my favorite parts of the show. I'm your host, Andy Bennett, and in my day job, I'm the CISO of Apollo Information Systems, and this is a production of Apollo Information Systems. With me today is my friend, Allan Alford, friend and colleague, I should say, who is the CTO and CISO over at a company, if you haven't heard of them, you should, TrustMAPP. Allan, how are you doing, man?
Good. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm going to be doing a little better here in just a minute, because that's the whole theme of the show, right? So cheers. It is good to see you. It has been too long since we weren't discussing something technical on a call.
It is good to do it.
Mm-hmm. Although we might get into something technical here in a little while. We'll see.
We're not going to be able to help ourselves. It's going to happen.
It is going to happen. So tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're doing it, all that stuff. I gave the real cursory thing. Okay. I've known Allan for years, so I know all about him, but he also has his own podcast that I'm sure and hope he will mention.
Okay. So I've been a CISO 5 times now. I'm currently at an awesome startup called TrustMAPP, where I'm CISO/CTO. It's my first CTO gig. It's a cybersecurity product, hence a CISO being CTO made sense. I'm helping to shape the direction of the product and keep it firmly in the lane of where a CISO needs it to be, right? That's the vision and the goal, is to make this the CISO's most useful tool for managing their program. Pretty straightforward tool where we're cybersecurity performance management. We help CISOs manage their program. In a nutshell, that's what we do. Let's see here. I also am the host of the Cyber Ranch podcast, episode 83, just released 2 mornings ago. So that's going strong and going well. I got a great series of guests. Andy, one of these days I got to have you on the show, by the way.
Love to do it.
And it's generally one topic per show, one guest per show, and we just kind of cover a topic that the guest is passionate about. The last couple of shows are actually AMAs, no guest. I've actually just been answering questions from the LinkedIn crowd, having a blast with that, getting some really good questions. I don't know. I've been in the industry 20 plus years now. That's me.
Well, let's start right there. What was the best question you got?
There were a lot of questions about reporting to the board and what you do and don't say upstairs, and how you get your message across. There were a lot of questions about efficacy of your program, how you measure it, how you report it. And then a lot of the questions were just about, what have you learned? You've been a CISO 5 times, surely you're better now than you were then, or hopefully you're better now than you were then. What have you learned along the way? And I think that was probably some of the more compelling material.
Fantastic. Well, I did promise you that I had something for you. And I'm from the country where I grew up. So for the audience who's listening and not watching a video, I just put my cowboy hat that I actually wear to mow the grass and do yard work for its functional, real purpose. You can see that it's not terribly steamed or anything like that because it has been formed by work. But I figured I'd put this on for you.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm famous for wearing my cowboy hat at conferences and such. And this is Andy's tip of the hat.
This is my literal tip of the hat. I'm famous for wearing ball caps everywhere, whether I'm in a 3-piece suit or not. And you've got the cowboy hat thing, but I also do wear my boots everywhere, so I'm known for that. But you can't really see that across the conference floor.
Right. Yeah.
So I promised you cyber roulette. Okay. We have no idea where this is going to go. So I Googled a whole bunch of cybersecurity related things in advance, and I have whole big long lists of things in the next screen. And I've scrolled down to the first one. And this one thinks that the top cybersecurity problems organizations are facing now. Well, who knows? One size fits one when it comes to problem sets in some cases. But they think that the number one problem is recognizing that you are a target. Thoughts?
I don't think that's true. I think we're all targets. I think the degree to which we're a target is up to debate. I think there may be companies that don't even have a CISO, that don't even have a formal security program, that are still playing the, why would they target me card? I think that is still out there. And I think there's an all too common story of ransomware struck the folks that thought they were too small or too obscure, or why would they hit a dentist office or whatever it might be. I think there is some of that out there, but I wouldn't argue that's one of the biggest threats or problems or challenges. I think the bigger challenge is, figuring out exactly how and where you're a target, and figuring out what the actual risks for your particular organization are. That's my answer on that one.
Well, there you go. And you mentioned dentists. For anybody who doesn't know, dentists have been taken to the cleaners repeatedly in the ransomware space, but they almost never hit just one dentist.
Right.
They hit them 400, 500, 800, 1,000 at a time because they're targeting MSP practices that focus on dentists. And I don't know what it is, but they've been hit repeatedly. Just for anybody who didn't know that, where the dentist reference comes from, because if it sounded oddly specific, it was specifically specific. So another one that I think is probably going to get the same kind of answer from you is they say data breaches due to remote work. Like, that's FUD to me. What do you think?
Yeah, due to remote work? No.
Due to remote, that's why I called it out. I separated it because of that. Data breaches, absolutely. Add that caveat there, due to remote work. What do you think?
No, I think there were people who were ready for remote work and people who weren't. But we're now going all the way back in time 2+ years now at this point, right? Maybe you had split tunnel VPN, or maybe you had regular VPN, but then everybody went remote and you had to split tunnel, or whatever compromises there were. I know that when COVID first hit, I had one friend who was at a very sophisticated and very real enterprise shop, was forced to buy some Soho VPN gear because that was all that was available. And they had this radical need to suddenly have everybody VPNing in. So there might have been some difficulties in the early stages. People that had to do things like split tunnel, people that had to do things like Soho Gear, but by now all that's been ironed out. To blame remote work as the root cause of anything is ridiculous. You've either got a nice, I can prepare for people to come in from the outside situation, or you don't. I dare say zero trust, but you're either prepped for it or you're not, and that has nothing to do with the fact that remote work is causing issues, right? Remote work. I like
how you threw zero trust out as a mic drop word and walked away from it. That was nice.
There you go.
That was nice. I liked that. Now, unsurprisingly, zero trust, they did the exact same thing in the article. Like it's highlighted in green in the article and it's just there, and there's 3 lines of text and that's it. That's all they did.
Right.
Yep. And I couldn't agree with you more, actually. I want to jump in on that Soho stuff. For anybody who doesn't know, that's small office, home office gear. So the entry level to commercial grade gear that there is, and sometimes it's even consumer grade gear that is high end consumer grade. And so what we're talking about is the same kind of hardware that the average gamer might have in their house. The average person who has been working at home longer than the pandemic has been around, like the kind of gear that folks who already needed reliable connectivity at home have, and it's highly ubiquitous. It's all over the country, but it lacks granular control. You don't have the abilities to lock it down and control it the way you do, and integrate it with any tool stack. That's another problem, right? It's meant to be a standalone piece of equipment, an appliance, if you will, that serves that function. They had to go and use Soho Gear, but I agree with you. I couldn't agree more that if people are still blaming remote work for inadequacies, it means that they've never made the case to go beyond the hard pivot.
Yeah. Work from home is a reality today. And I know there's this great big movement of back to the office that's happening, and there's a lot of churn and a lot of employees getting very bitter about it. I don't know how many companies are truly part of the back to the office movement. I think a lot of people are just feeling the burn of commercial real estate that's empty, that they're still paying on. But at the end of the day, at least some remote work is the reality, and you have to accommodate it. You have to. So think through your infrastructure, assume you're going to have remote workers, plan accordingly.
I hear a lot of people talking about how they defeat attack. And when I say people, I mean security product companies, security services companies, what have you, right? Talking about how to defeat attacks, resist, repel, don't get hit. Even if they go after you, we'll stop 99% of malware, whatever. And even if you take their claims as read, 99% is not 100%. So I have developed an opinion that while protections are super important, changing your perspective to focus on resilience over resistance, and that's how I like the 2R thing, so that's how I framed it. Resilience over resistance has become my leading stake in the ground when people are approaching me asking me about controls and stuff like that. What are your thoughts? Am I on the right path?
I think so. And this dovetails neatly with something I just did. I just spoke at RSA this year, and my talk was NIST CSF over time. And my argument was that as you mature your security program, you get away from identify, protect, and into detect, respond, recover. That in the earliest stages, detect, respond, recover appears to be sort of a reactionary thing. But as you mature your program, that actually takes to the forefront, because in theory, you've got enough basic protections in place. And now what you're far more concerned about is resilience. That's exactly it. So I'm going to 100% agree with you on that one.
Yeah, well, and to dig in, because I did attend your talk and I hadn't actually tied the two together. I enjoyed your talk, by the way, but I hadn't actually tied the two together, even though they absolutely are. So you're treating the CSF as a continuum spectrum that you can move along in your approach. And I wanted to rephrase it that way. And I'm seeing you nodding, since people can't see you nodding if they're just listening. And that continuum that you've turned it into, I think, makes it entirely approachable and usable. And so I appreciate that. And it's along the same lines of what CIS tried to do and does do to a degree with their controls. The CSC, right? Used to be 20, now it's 18. Still starts with asset management. You can't protect what you don't know. Why is it that we still struggle with asset management?
It's the core and the foundation of all of it. It really is. CSF, CIS, ISO covers it. ISO 27001 speaks to asset management. Almost any good framework is going to. It's a challenge because, I hate the phrase shadow IT. First of all, let's start there. The reality is people go and make IT things, not because they have, not because they're shadow IT, not because they're anti the business or anti-security or against your mission as the security practitioners. They're creating quote unquote shadow IT because they are needing IT that is aligned with their part of the business. The bottom line is all shadow IT really is, if you're the CISO and the CIO sitting together in a room and the door is closed and somebody asks you, this new instance of shadow IT, what does it really mean? What it means is we weren't as fast as the business needed us to be. That's what it really means. And so I think that's going to always happen. There's going to be need. There's going to be assets that appear that weren't part of your purview, that weren't part of your plan, that weren't part of your current detection schema. Assets are going to be constantly appearing that you don't have a handle on. There is no escaping that reality. It will always be there. And so that's the number one factor, I think, why it's difficult. And the other factor is actually the complete opposite argument, which is the legacy stuff that's been there so dang long that maybe the agents aren't installed on it, or maybe the sweeps forgot about it. I actually worked at one company, I kid you not. We were going through the entire asset mission and we didn't uncover a stray server. We didn't uncover a stray rack.
Data center?
We uncovered a stray data center. And that's because it was so old, it didn't have any of the new tooling on it. It was mostly out of production. It was just maintaining a few little things, and it just got forgotten about. You always hear the story from back in the Novell days. There was supposedly the Novell 3.x server that they accidentally built a wall around it and walled off the room. And it was continuing to run for years. And finally, they had to follow the cables and figure out there was a room with a walled off server in it. That kind of thing. You've got legacy stuff that you're never going to get rid of either. And so between those two, it's almost a pincer's maneuver. You're going to always have an asset challenge.
I agree. The number of people who take that challenge and just use it as an excuse to dismiss it and move up the chain in the controls.
Right.
Like how often do you see that, and how big of an issue is that for you? Because that means that they're trying to protect things. And there's like, give me all the protection, but they have no idea what they're actually trying to protect.
Right. Yeah. There's my old boss, Steve Williams over at NTT. I've stolen this from him and used it everywhere. See it, manage it, secure it. That was his little byline. That he got the whole business, see it, manage it, secure it. That's how he got the whole business engaged with what the security mission is. You cannot secure it if you cannot manage it. You cannot manage it if you cannot see it. And it really, truly is that simple. So step one is the asset identification. You have to be able to see it. Then you can manage it. Once you can manage it, you can secure it. It really is that simple. I love that one. I've stolen that from him. I'm going to use it everywhere. I always give him credit, but I'm going to use that one for the rest of my life.
And that was Steve?
Steve Williams over at NTT.
I'm making sure that when I rip this off, I give him credit through you as well.
There you go.
So I want to drill into that, because see it as asset management. Got it. Right. Or asset inventorying, et cetera. And assets can be physical or virtual or software or whatever. CIS1 is physical and virtual machines and infrastructure. CIS2 is applications and whatnot, just for anybody who's looking into that stuff. The next thing on that wasn't see it, secure it. It was see it, manage it. Mm-hmm. Would you dive into the nuance that I know is there, but I want them to hear from you?
So for me to secure a thing properly, what am I doing? I'm installing an EDR on it, perhaps. Mm-hmm. I am perhaps putting an agent on it for some network sweeping thing that wants to talk to it and detect it. There's going to be sweeping tools and there's going to be agent tools. Those are the only two tools out there for an end device, for an endpoint, for a server, whatever it might be. Those are the two ways of seeing what's in your suite and securing it. Is either a network scan type approach or an agent type approach. Well, to get the network scan pointing to it, you have to have network management software to know what your segments are and where it is. So there's a certain amount of management before you can even accurately aim your security scans at it. And it's the same story with the agents. Before you can put an agent on a box, you have to have the ability to put agents on the box. And so there's a management layer that comes in between the see it and the secure it that I think is vital. And we don't probably want to get into name brands, but there are tools out there whose sole purpose is pushing agents and pushing things down. In my company at TrustMAPP, I just finished configuring a laptop just yesterday. We had the agent that does the thing, that does the push, that then puts the security tools on, and the security tools take over from there. That was one solution. When I was at NTT, much bigger company, we had a different solution, but it was the same paradigm. You've got to have something that can deploy. You've got to have something that can sense the network health, see if the thing needs to be deployed, and deploy it if it needs to be deployed. That's management. That's not security.
Absolutely. And in our own practice, we lead with management too. We have to manage it before we can secure it. We use deployment technologies and stuff like that in our own practices. So couldn't agree more. So in the theme of cyber roulette, we're going to take a hard shift here.
All right.
Treating cybersecurity like an IT issue instead of a financial issue. And I will also add on ... or other issue.
Okay.
Is cybersecurity an IT issue? Is the first sub question. Is it a financial issue? If none of the above, what is it?
Cybersecurity used to be called information security. And that's an important distinction because cyber implies technology, information implies data. And there's a subtle difference there. Because at the end of the day, an information technology issue could be something as simple as somebody printed a bunch of hard copy, loaded it in the box, and walked out the door with it. You've just had a data breach, right? So in my mind, cybersecurity, information security, whichever term you want to use, are bigger than IT. They're about information. They're about data. And data could reside in an IT context. Most often it does, right? But really what you're concerned about is information integrity, data integrity, not anything else. So it's important that you focus on the impact of the information, the meaningfulness of it. We're talking now business impact analysis. We're talking risk, likelihood, and impact, risk quantification. We're talking about all those types of activities and exercises. You're ultimately spitting out results that are business terms and business results. You've got a risk as a business that somebody is going to commit fraud. You've got a risk as a business that somebody is going to physically steal inventory from the warehouse. You've got a risk as a business that the same types of things could happen with information and data assets, right? There's no real difference. Risk management, enterprise risk management has been around far longer than cyber, right? Financial accounting and financial risk has been around far longer than cyber. We are nothing more than the data and information bolt-ons to those existing practices. And we're much bigger than IT as a result. We're a part of that world, not the IT world.
When people ask me, what do I do for a living? More and more, I find myself answering the question, not, I do cybersecurity, or I do security, or I used to be with the government, now I can help. I like to make those jokes, but more and more, I've been describing myself as a risk management professional. Mm-hmm. Because it kind of is more, I agree with you, it's more illustrative of what we actually do. I happen to help businesses manage risk through cyber, mm-hmm. but I'm managing business risk. I'm not just looking at, I'm going to catch 79% of all bad things that could possibly happen in an organization with this endpoint agent, right? Yep. That's not what I do. That's what an engineer does.
Right.
That's not what a CISO does. That's not what a strategic business aligned leader does.
Right.
How do we grow the business aligned acumen and expertise within our field? Because for me, what's not on this list is a lack of people who are able to hit the ground running with that expertise. And I know we talk about cyber workforce all the time, and we are part of the cyber workforce. So how do we include business awareness in the upbringing of the next generation? Because, you know, a lot of CISOs out there got a lot of gray hair these days.
Right. I started very much, 20 plus years ago now as a technologist. That's how I got into cybersecurity. I was an IT guy. Then I became a product security guy. Then I went back and became, kind of merged the two and became an IT plus product security guy. And as I climbed the ladder and made director and made senior director, et cetera, I became more and more business savvy as I progressed through rank. I don't necessarily know that I was becoming more business savvy because of time. It was more about rank. I didn't acquire the better business skills until I was a director level, and I didn't really get good at them until I was a CISO. And so it's easy to say as you climb the ranks, you gain more business skills. That's a great simplified statement of what goes on. But to your point, how do we actually prep people to more quickly take that journey, right? Because I was on my own. I was a technologist having to learn business the hard way as I got promoted and struggled to figure things out and couldn't find what I was doing and where I was doing it. And oh my God, what does he mean when he says that? I have to go research this term and that term. And, am I a fraud? What am I doing at this table? All of that I went through, was a hard journey. And I think what we have to do is take what we've learned as the gray hairs and share that back. I think it's really important that even the folks that are technologists understand a little more about the business and the business context they're in. And so ways I do that. One of the things I do as an employer, as a leader, as a manager in my company and wherever I work, is I make sure to share the bigger business perspective, even with the individual contributors who have nothing to do with the business. I make sure that everyone understands the reason I gave you this priority this week over this other priority, the reason we shifted gears and temporarily suspended that thing to do this thing, or the reason we're doing these three things in the first place, whatever it might be. There are valid business reasons for each and every one of these decisions. And I'm going to share what those business decisions are. I'm that transparent with my teams. I will invite them into some meetings that they normally probably wouldn't get invited into. I will share business information based on, here's where your role fits the bigger picture and why it matters. So I do that within the workplace. The other thing I do is my podcast. I have a very business-centric, very business-forward approach to CISOing these days. I try to share that and espouse that and push that out to the community through my podcast as much as I can as well. So I do it on the streets and I do it at home.
So you're using your platform and position to help develop others with intent. How pivotal was your leadership in helping you develop?
I had a few key leaders at a few junctures who absolutely saved my bacon. I had some who didn't. I had some who completely left me to thrash on my own. But I had a few key leaders over the years who really upped my business game and who did it consciously, the same way I'm doing it now with the folks that report to me. It's a matter of sometimes sitting someone down and saying, you know what? Totally appreciate where you're coming from, but I'm going to show you a bigger picture view and get you brought into this bigger context and have that whole conversation. Sometimes there's a business driver that is more important than a security driver, and a CISO knows this, and a CISO will work with this and be a part of a joint decision that perhaps this particular security ask was backburnered for a while so we could cover this other business need that we had. And a CISO is used to those compromises, but it's interesting that a lot of individual contributors are still so steadfast in their commitment to their one cause. They got their blinders on basically, that they see that as selling out, right? And the reality is the entire world runs on compromise. The entire business world is about bargaining and deal making at every turn. Compromise is integral, compromise is key, and you cannot see that as selling out to the man. You can't. It's the realities of business. And so I think that a boss that can walk you through that perspective and get you to see it in a positive light is probably the most critical and pivotal moment somebody will go through that's resistant to that.
I had a couple too. I think all of the good ones do, because nobody comes to all the realizations you need to have alone.
Yeah.
And if you do it right, you realize that there's always room for more. Because like Steve, for example, you already cited one of your bosses in this very podcast.
Yep.
And I know that Steve wasn't all that long ago in your career. right?
Mhm.
Which means that you're still taking insights as you go. And I hope everybody paid attention to that piece. The next thing I have is a controversial one.
Okay.
Because you came up through the tech stack. I came up through the tech stack. Most of my favorite CISOs came up through the tech stack. How do you feel about CISOs who did not come up through the tech stack? Do you think it's possible to be an effective CISO having no IT or technical background? And I've heard them called, and this is not a pejorative term, just for anybody who's out there, the MBA CISO.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you feel about that?
I'm not anti folks coming up through a different background. I'm not anti at all. However, I will state for the record that if you come up through any means other than the technical side of the house, you have a more challenging job in front of you. And I'll give some concrete examples. GRC in theory can be done without any technical knowledge, in theory. In practice, as you get into the details and the nuances and the governance and the are we compliant here or not, having an auditor come up to you and ask you a stupid question, and let's admit it, auditors come up and ask stupid questions. We've all been there if we've been there, and if you haven't, this happens. You can swap that stupid question away very quickly with a small amount of technical expertise in that particular area.
Mm-hmm.
You get a SOC 2 auditor who says, I demand to see your antivirus, and you go to your technical team and they say, we don't have antivirus. Oh, what do we have? We have EDR. Oh, you have to know what EDR is and be able to articulate that to your auditor and say, hey, we don't need antivirus because we're far past antivirus. And here's what I mean when I say that. So there's kind of one minor example. So knowing the technical skills is vital for the technical half of the house, guaranteed. But even on the GRC side, those skills come in handy. So if you grow up pure play GRC and you're trying to adapt and learn the technology piece, you're going to have to surround yourself with some very strong technology leaders. You're going to have to do a lot of homework and a lot of reading at home at night. You can do it. It's just going to be a harder job.
I agree completely. And I think that there's room for anybody who's willing to put in the work to be successful.
Yep.
But I agree across the board. I'd love to have some controversy there, but we're on the same mind there. And that is actually the problem of putting us together. We agree on far too much. What do you think I disagree? You've heard me talk many times. We've talked for years. What do you think I disagree with you on?
I can't think of one.
Well, that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. If you're thinking like me, then you're in trouble. I'm trying to think of one where we got into differences of opinion, even on other than little nuances here and there. I can't think of one. I honestly can't.
Well, keep that in the back of your head, because if you come up with it, you shout it out.
Okay.
I want to circle back to that. And while we do so, I think that's actually a surprisingly decent segue into BYOD. Bring your own device or bring your own doom.
Okay. Back to zero trust. If it's done right, BYOD is no problem whatsoever. You have to have the network block and check for health. You have to have the SaaS apps block and check for identity. If you've got a strong identity and access management play, if you've got a strong SASE play, if you've got your secure configuration management we talked about, as well as the agents and tools that get pushed, even the mobile phones, and I'm talking about MAM, not MDM. I know everybody, you get the whole debate about, oh my God, I don't want you're in charge of my phone. I'm like, great, we'll do MAM. We'll just do the Outlook tools themselves and leave the bulk of the phone alone, but we will insist on encryption and a passcode. You know, you've got the controls in hand today in today's tech stack to manage BYOD quite well. It's just a matter of were you prepared for it, just like with the work from home.
How important is process to the efficacy of a security program? That's a very broad question.
More important than the other two. And by the other two, I mean people and technology. Process is how you align people. Process is how you align technology. I'm going to put it at number one. Now, when it comes to the actual boots on the ground and where the fight is, people are number one, technology is number two, process is number three. But when it comes to the strategic forward momentum of a program, I put process first.
All right, there you go. And that wasn't in my roulette. That one popped into my head. I noticed that you didn't provide a scenario where tech is the most important.
Ever.
Elaborate on that. Again, I think we agree, but elaborate on that.
So it goes back to my mantra about, as the CISO, what are you doing? We just talked about, you're part of a greater world of enterprise risk. You're part of a greater world of financial risk. You're part of a greater world of business risk. As a CISO, the first words out of your mouth in every encounter with your peers and above should be a business term. The second words out of your mouth should be a risk term, and the third words out of your mouth should be technology. If you lead with technology, you're going to lose your audience. If you lead with technology, you are going to confuse. You're going to come off like this guy that doesn't get the big picture and just wants his little meh, 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 and you're going to ultimately fail. And to that end, technology in the internals of your program. So I'm talking about out and up. Now let's talk about, managing your program itself. Let's talk about down. Technology solves problems, but you better darn well know what those problems are, know to what degree they need to be solved, and know the impact and the repercussions on the people involved before you ever deploy a single piece of technology. Because if you deploy technology blind and not having those things in hand beforehand is being blind, you will miss the mark. It's an all too common story that you find out, cyber insurance carriers are starting to hone in on this one, right? Oh, so you have an EDR, great, show us the configs, right? You can have the technology and blindly throw it at the problem, but you darn well better be addressing the actual issues with it. And it's very easy to have the one without having the other. The technology is there to solve specific and concrete problems that need to be clarified and distilled and crisply outlined, and the results of which need to be clarified and crisply outlined as well.
I'd like it noted that you said distilled, which is the entire point of this podcast. Cheers.
Cheers.
Because the point is to distill these problems. So circling back to distill the problem again, let's say somebody doesn't work for a supportive leader, who doesn't work for somebody who is as business aligned as they need to be. And maybe they work at a lower level, but have designs on getting somewhere else in their career down the road. Where does a person who is self-motivated go to start to learn the business and to learn, you said every word out of your mouth needs to be business, a business term. Where does somebody who doesn't have supportive leadership, who brings them into meetings, who teaches them, who mentors them and guides them, who cares about their career, go to learn these things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This is something I've actually been exploring recently with some other folks, and I'll toss out kind of a random shotgun blast of answers to it. First and foremost is find those resources out in the world, like my podcast, for example, where people are talking about these things, where people who are security practitioners are talking about business, and learn from those who have gotten there. Find mentors and peers, find folks who write blog articles, find podcasters, find anybody you can find in the space. If your boss is in role X and isn't doing what you need done, you can find others also in role X out there in the world who are doing what you think needs to be done in this regard. So you can always start there. Second of all is education, formal education. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Do you need an MBA to be a successful CISO? No, you do not. Do you need a good understanding of business fundamentals? Absolutely you do. Can you learn that on the job? I did. Wasn't fun, wasn't easy in some cases, but I mastered it pretty well. I would argue I'm still weak in the areas of accounting and finance, for example. This is specifically why I said I was just talking this through with people. I wasn't just talking about what they might do. I was talking about what I might do. I did some research and come to find out almost every local community college offers classes on business accounting for beginners, business finance for beginners. Mm-hmm. Things like how to read a 10K, how to read an 8K, how to read a 10Q in a publicly traded company.
Hold on, distill that. What is a 10K?
10K is a regularly filed document put out by a publicly traded company mandated by the SEC that speaks to their state and posture, material risks and things like that are identified. Their financials are put out there in public. An 8K is a specific incident filing. It's a reactionary filing, not a regular filing. And the 10Q, honestly, I don't know what a 10Q is. Back to, I'm going to go find these classes and go do this myself.
That's what Google is for, because I only know 10K and 8K as well.
Yeah, 10Qs I've heard of. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But that's the whole point. My local community college is going to have classes that are going to help me shore up those deficiencies. Here I am, a 5 times over CISO, still needing better understanding of finance and accounting, and I'm going to go take some community college classes. That's how I'm going to solve that problem. Why spend a bunch of money? I don't need the MBA. I've already made CISO. I don't need an MBA, but I do want that knowledge, and that knowledge is easily obtainable. I'm gonna go get it.
So you highlight another thing I get asked all the time is, you don't need an MBA. I agree, you don't need an MBA. How do you feel about certifications? Should you be continuing to chase other certifications?
I personally got a master's in information systems and security, and I used to have a CISM certification. I let it expire. In my mind, you can have a stack of certs, or you can have the master's degree. They're roughly equivalent to one another. Go get a bunch of certs, go get a master's. You're in about the same boat. In either case, I think they are helpful. They can be a leading indicator of your success in the role, but they are, just like we talked about, can you be a non-technology CISO? Yes, you can. You can certainly succeed as a CISO without any certs and without any master's degree at all. You can certainly do it. They're just going to make your life a little easier if you do them, right? If you take the time to master and pass a certification, you've ingested some real material that's relevant. Same thing with a master's degree. So do I think they're required? No. Do I think they're helpful? Yes. Same story I'm going to give when you say, can you become a CISO without a technology background? It's the same story.
Yep. Well, and just for context, I have a master's degree, very similar to your master's degree. I have 2 professional certifications. One of them is a CISM that I haven't let lapse just because there's a backstory there that I'll tell you later. And it's just a matter of pride. I'm not letting it go. But the other one is a CBCP, Certified Business Continuity Professional, which is a more business-centric certification.
Nice.
And I have found that one to be very useful. And I have found that having that background, that was my first foray into a business-centric thing. And I did that in 2008. Everybody got laid off in 2008, me included. And so I did that certification and education. That's when I went back for my master's degree as well. And so that's another thing I think I'll go ahead and point out, especially if you have recession fears or something. Never pass up an opportunity to continue your education, because I will say that while the certifications are nice to have, for me, the master's degree opened far more doors. Far more doors.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Let's see. This is such a softball. One of the major issues facing, I'm putting the voice on purpose because this is dumb. One of the major issues facing cybersecurity today is the rise of double extortion ransomware. That's old news, right?
That's very old news. I think at this point, so the last stat I saw was 80% of it's now double extortion.
Yeah.
It's more effective.
It's SOP, right?
Yeah, of course they're going to do it. It's more effective. Done. Next question.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, why is this even on the list? This shouldn't be on my dartboard.
Just call it ransomware. You don't even need to say double extortion ransomware. Ransomware inherently almost always now comes with the threat of releasing the data, not just destroying.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a better hook to get more money out of you.
Trivia.
It works.
The Maze group, the Maze, I forget what they called themselves on after that. Maze ransomware.
Yeah.
December 4th, 2019 was the first instance. There may have been others that didn't make the news, but the first one that went public that was a double extortion ransomware, and that's the day the game changed.
Yep.
And the only reason I can remember that date is because it was impactful. I was presenting to every CISO of every agency in the state of Florida that day on the ransomware incident that we had in Texas a few months before that, when the base in Pensacola was attacked by that gunman that year.
Yeah.
And the FBI agent in the room had to run out to go respond to that. And Maze targeted the city of Pensacola when the shooting hit the news. And so these bad guys are super opportunistic. And for whatever reason, that date is burned in my brain.
Yep. I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
Not a fun rodeo.
No, not even a little. So you don't have to call it double extortion ransomware. It's just ransomware now. That's what they do. That's how they're going to do it. You might as well just assume. And you should have always assumed, I think we should have always, it was naive to not think that they didn't take our data while they had the access to damage our data.
Of course.
Absolutely. So here's one. And it kind of ties in. I think we're starting to weave a fabric here. It kind of ties into your shadow IT comment and cloud adoption outpacing security. It can only outpace security if your organization is outpacing you, right?
Yes,
as a CISO?
Yes. You just described the same phenomenon. I don't call it shadow IT. I'll call it business aligned IT. It's better business alignment than you have. Same thing with cloud. Obviously, cloud, weirdly is not new. We still think of cloud as the cool new thing. You know how long cloud's been around now? It's ridiculous how long it's been around. And, development is now cloud. Data centers are now cloud. Everything is now cloud. If you are not getting a handle on CI/CD, if you are not getting a handle on DevOps, if you are not getting a handle on the fact that most of your apps are SaaS, you are getting yourself in a big amount of trouble. You just are. So get in front of it. It's just like the work from home thing. Maybe you had to temporarily get some Soho gear, but by now you should have the real solutions in place. It's the same story with cloud. It's not that hard to get in front of cloud. It's just a new technology. Every new technology has its new risks and new threats, and there's new tools that have come out to address those risks and threats. You just got to learn what they are and deploy them. Just get in front of it. It's not too hard. It will require investment. And I think one of the single biggest problems that new cloud adopters have is there's the myth that cloud is somehow more affordable than on-prem. That was the myth that they sold cloud with to us way back when it first started. And there's still people that cling to that. And so unfortunately, you'll find the occasional CISO whose CIO got sold a bill of goods, turned around and sold that bill of goods to the organization. And now the CISO's wanting to know, what about all this extra attack surface and where's my extra money to secure it? And everyone's looking at them like, what do you mean extra money? We're supposed to be saving money. That does happen. I've heard of plenty of CISOs in that spot with early cloud adoption. But again, a couple years down the line, you better darn well have budgeted for it and already be addressing it and dealing with it. The tools are out there. Get a hold of them.
That's like remote work. I'm seeing a pattern.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to rant on that one, but
no,
you know, easily 3/4 of my vendor buddies work at cloud specific security companies.
So I finished. Well, you know that it's a really expanding space.
Yeah.
And with good reason and good need. Not everybody is selling something that is worth buying, but everybody is selling what they're selling.
Yeah. Yeah. Cloud is a major and core focus of the security industry now versus on-prem security. I'd say there's more cloud than more on-prem these days. If you look at all the new startups that have come out, it's more cloud focused as Absolutely. It needs to be. Well, if the industry can do it, you can do it.
So I opened the episode with a glass of Balvenie 21, which was my last drink in the bottle. And it was delicious, by the way, just in case anybody hasn't tried it. If you find it on sale like I did when I bought that bottle, you should try it because it's amazing. But I'm transitioning to a lovely Highland Park 18. What are you drinking?
I am drinking Ron Zacapa XO, which is a Guatemalan rum aged in sherry casks, hence the XO designation. It is grown way up in the mountains at high altitude, unlike a lot of the rums are coming from the sugarcane growing down at the bases of the mountains, right? But also more interestingly, it is also the only distiller in, as far as I know, the entire Latin American world that is owned by a woman. So it's got a lot of interesting heritage and interesting twists to it. It's really smooth. I'm not even normally a rum guy, but this stuff is profoundly smooth and the sherry flavors are there and it's quite delicious.
I'll have to give it a try. But not today. So I've got a couple more. I've got lots. We have as much time as we have is how many of these things I have because I Googled lots of things in preparation. So this one, I feel like you may not agree because, well, that's because I don't fully agree. Quote unquote, a more sophisticated cyber threat landscape. And if you recall, a few months ago, I posted asking about the evolution or expansion of the cyber threat landscape and whether or not it was just evolving or truly expanding. So a more sophisticated cyber threat landscape as one of the top issues or problems facing cybersecurity. How do you feel about that characterization?
I'm going to flip that around and say it's actually a more sophisticated and nuanced and vast and varied and faceted attack surface is the real problem.
See, yes, I'm trying to find something we'll disagree on so we can fight, but yeah, absolutely. So everybody's in love with APIs and they integrate them without a second thought. They're like, give me my keys and let's type in some stuff. 10 minutes later, I got data flowing. You already highlighted that this is all a data problem, right? Every time you join any data, pass any data, impact any data, using any interconnectivity of multiple systems, you have created a junction that expands your attack surface.
Yep.
Period. Thoughts on API security and stuff like that?
I think you're right. I think it's not just API too. It's IoT. It's SaaS. It's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. It's so easy to spin up a new cloud thingy jigger and to have, we're back to that business aligned IT thing. If you've enabled cloud in your company and you've got dev teams all over the company, I can guarantee you there is new cloud attack service you don't know about that's spun up that has vital data inside of it and is processing and slinging this data around, transmitting it, storing it, etc. So the attack surface is growing steadily from not just API, but all this other stuff as well.
So diving into attack surface
Mhm.
and focusing on technology, which we have so far pretty much neglected. How do you feel about the attack surface management cybersecurity space? Every time I turn around, I'm hearing about a new ASM tool.
Yeah,
It used
Chasm
to be a novelty. Now it has its own name. It's ASM, just like breach attack simulation used to be really cool, and now it's just BAS.
yeah. Well, there's Chasm too, right? CAASM, Chasm, which is what Cloud Asset Attack Surface Management.
Yeah,
I think it's vital and real. I do. I believe this is a real part of the industry that actually matters, and I say that because we're back to see it, manage it, secure it. Chasm helps you see it and manage it and secure it. It's walking you through that journey. There are some really strong players out there in this space. I believe in them. Even in the day job, I have gone out of my way in terms of technical partnerships. We've got very few technical partnerships already in play at the day job. The first two we did were both Chasm partners. And that was on purpose. That was for a reason. Somebody needs to get in front of this stuff, and that these look like the guys that are gonna pull this off for us.
Well, let the record show, I actually didn't know that in advance. I know lots of stuff that Allan is up to, but I didn't know that one. So that was not actually the leading softball that it sounded like. Well done, sir. In that same vein, not with attack surface management, but with the more sophisticated cyber landscape,
yeah,
a growing number of zero-day attacks. Is that, I mean, technically it grows every time another one is discovered. But if we were to look at the linear trends, is this an actual issue? Like of the top vulnerabilities and ways we can be attacked matter. I don't want to make anybody feel like I don't accept, recognize, and realize that.
Yeah.
But as a CISO, should you be losing sleep and focusing on the growing number of zero-day attacks?
I don't think so. And I'll bet if we clocked it to your point, is it an accelerated growth, or is it just new things arise, right? Does a new 0-day appear every month and always has every month, probably kind of thing, versus this month where there are 3 and next month there's 4 kind of a thing? I think it's probably velocity and not acceleration. And if you look at the entire industry as a whole and look at all the bad things that have ever gone down, 0 days are a pretty darn small percentage of the bigger problem space. More often than not, it's going to be something like phishing and a human vector. Behind that is the unpatched stuff that was found and known and been around forever and got hacked because it never got patched and updated and dealt with, even though it was a known thing for long periods of time. Behind that is 0 days, right? 0 days are not the leading indicator of a CISO's misery.
No, and super APTs are probably relying on 0 days in some cases, but even they, for the most part, use commodity off-the-shelf bad guy services to buy access from an access broker. Just in case anybody doesn't know what that is, an access broker is somebody who does exactly that. They sell access to your systems because somebody else already got it, which is why we've all been talking about assuming compromise, assuming breach for so long. And so I think that we also would be doing a disservice to the distillation of the topic if we didn't highlight active exploits versus 0 days. Mm-hmm. You want to tell them the difference between the two, or you want me to do it?
Go for it.
So a 0 day is something that can potentially maybe be a problem that can be exploited, but until you have actually commoditized it and weaponized it in a way that it can be actively exploited, we say in the wild, meaning in the real world outside of a laboratory condition, it doesn't represent a material threat that prioritizes it above existing material threats.
There you go. There you go. I love that definition. I used to have as one of my interview questions for folks wanting to join my team, what's the difference between a threat, a vulnerability, and an exploit? And walking through that. Yeah.
What's your favorite exploit?
What's my favorite exploit?
Yeah.
Over time, I'd have to say probably I'm going to go with Heartbleed.
Yeah.
The way that they took a security stack and actually managed to hit it with a buffer type attack and managed to bleed the buffer out and gather the secret information from what was in itself a security protocol. Buffer based, crack it open and see the inner secrets. I think that's probably my favorite.
And I'm still finding Heartbleed on some of our pen test engagements.
Oh,
You'd be amazed. Oh yeah, no, just for the record, this has been fixed since 2015. I know that because I read the report that we provided to the client where we found it. Heartbleed should not exist in your environment. And if it does, you have a lot of work to do because
0 days are not your problem.
0 days are not your problem if you can still find Heartbleed, right? And there was, in fairness, there was a time where Heartbleed was a 0 day. That
Absolutely.
day is a lot of days ago, right?
Yep.
So did you see the Janet Jackson attack?
Mm-mm.
So apparently something about her song Rhythm Nation can, through acoustic waves, disrupt old hard drives. Check it out.
Crazy.
It got an actual RCE yesterday.
That is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Disrupt an old. You're talking about physical spindle magnetic.
I am.
Wow. I have to go look at that one. That one sounds fun. I
check it
got
out.
some of those old drives on the shelf. I'll have to attack them with Janet Jackson's.
I'll send you the
music.
link later. And
Do it.
then there's another one. There's another one I read about as a result of learning about that I never knew but intuitively recognized. So there's this phenomenon a long time ago. We were doing some destructive testing of devices in my research lab when I used to have a research lab. And best we could tell, the when you induce vibration in one of those high-speed spindles, 15,000 RPM and up, when that vibration inevitably, because we're working at nanoscale, causes the Readhead to impact very briefly the surface of the disk.
Mm.
When you scale things up to real world velocities and whatnot, it's the same equivalent of a 747 digging into a field at like Mach 2.
And reading a blade of grass at a time.
Exactly. So it doesn't take too much vibration to crash that plane over and over again, because for whatever reason at nanoscales, that Readhead is a lot more resilient than a 747.
The
Readhead survives and continues to wreak havoc while the data starts to get literally scraped away. And it was a really fun study, but it turns out that in certain data centers with different acoustics and stuff like that, shouting in the data center can knock things offline. And if you have your fire alarm placed in the wrong position in the building, it can knock your stuff offline.
Wow. This reminds me of the old MFM drives before IDE, where you had to do a physical part command and get those heads away from those disks whenever you weren't actively using the disk.
Right. And if anybody has no idea what Allan's talking about, go Google it, and you can probably find something in the Computer History Museum. And I know what he's talking about because I have gray hair. I have more gray hair than he does, and it's not fair because he's a couple years older than me.
I've aged well, like this rum.
You have aged well. My face is, if I shave, I'll still look like a baby, but nothing hides the gray on the top.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's just that simple. I can scrape it off my face, but there's no point.
Yeah. The beard is completely gray now. That's why I don't have it anymore.
Oh,
I shaved the beard. I look younger. Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
The beard is 100% gray. I just shave it off. I look younger.
There you go. Well, you know what? We should do like a no shave November competition. I'll shave on the first of the month, and we'll see whose beard comes in faster and grayer by the end of the month.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it.
What is do you win if you have more gray hair or longer hair? Like how's the winner going to be determined? Because I think
that's a real good question.
There's possibly like a charity opportunity here. Like how do we determine a winner?
Based on an objective online test of who looks older.
Oh, there you go.
And we'll have the audience submit. No, he's older looking. Yeah, whoever's older looking wins the prize. All
right. Rules: you are allowed to get a haircut at the end of the month. Not trim or shave your beard at the end of the month until it's over.
I like it.
All right. When we're done drinking, if you're still in tomorrow, then I'm in. All right. So that one's dumb too. Managing the 2021 cyber threat landscape. Somebody in marketing wrote that. Let's go to the next one.
There's a cyber threat landscape right outside my front door. Every time I open the front door, I'm like, oh no, the cyber threat landscape, it's here. And I lose sleep about it. I do.
Here's another one, hard pivot.
Okay.
Let's talk boards. Lack of information security representation on the board. Now, something I've read a number of studies on this, and anywhere from 60 to 73 to 89 to 95%, depending on who you ask and how they gathered their data, of boards see cybersecurity as one of their number one concerns.
Okay.
Is that lip service? Is my first question. We're going to talk about boards for a minute.
I would love to see the source of the stats, because it's been my experience that a lot of boards acknowledge its significance. Some boards still to date even ignore furiously its significance. But even the ones who do acknowledge it, I don't know that they're necessarily putting it at number one. Traditional business risk has always been there, right? The data center could catch on fire. Fraud could be committed that has nothing to do with cyber. A competitor could come and take you out. There's business risks that are big, that have always been there, that are bigger than cyber. Anybody who says cyber risks are the number one risk of a business probably doesn't understand the rest of the business. It is possible you are number one as cyber, and that would take maybe a technology company like Amazon Web Services. I would argue cyber is probably their number one risk, but data center fires are probably right up there too, or whatever they might have. And they may get
call those,
this is why they have
thermal events. That's what they call those, by the way.
Thermal events. You could have a thermal event. But why do these data centers have such incredible fire suppression systems? And why do they have these generator backups and battery backups and all these things? They're there to address known risks. You are going to invest more in your data center uptime than you are in your data center hackability, right? So I can't say cyber is the number one risk. I can't. In most cases, it's not. Even at a technology company, we just had an example where it might not be. So it's important to recognize that it is important, but to beat your drum and claim to be the number one problem in the room, this is part of the whole problem we talked about individual contributors having to learn the business context before they can be successful higher up the ranks in the company. It's imperative to me that you be aware of the business around you, and to beat your drum and say we're the number one risk. You're probably not. There's risks that are far older than you, that are far bigger than you, that have already been mitigated. You have, insurance in case you get sued. You have all manner of insurances as a business. You've got fire protection. You've got, competitive landscape issues. You've got, faulty product issues. You've got all these risks to the business that have always been there. Think about the lawsuit for a car manufacturer whose car explodes when you get in an impact. I mean, is cyber bigger than that? Probably not. We're talking loss of life. Like, let's get into the healthcare services industry. Loss of life is a bigger risk than cyber there as well. So,
and there's a whole bunch of people screaming at the screen right now saying, "But cyber can cause loss of life." Yes, it can. But there's a lot of other ways that can cause loss of life as well. So just throwing that down there for anybody who had that visceral reaction, because I can see that.
Yeah. No, and I've got friends that are healthcare CISOs who very much have to consider loss of life as one of their risk factors when they're doing their risk quant. Absolutely, it's real. But my point is, loss of life risks were there long before cyber was there. Mm-hmm. That's my point.
Absolutely. So in that same vein, focusing on boards for a couple more minutes, mm-hmm. How do you talk to the board, and how do you recommend that other people talk to the board? What does the board want to hear from you? And I'll even cut it off at the knees and say they don't want to hear about tools, people. They want to hear about business risk.
Business, risk, technology, in that order, right? Same thing we talked about. Business first, risk second, technology third. But to answer your question, first of all, who is the board you speak of? There is no such thing. There are many boards comprised of many individuals, and you are going to have to learn your board, and you are going to have to learn your board's individual members. And if you are savvy and you are expected to present cyber stuff to the board, you are going to be having individual conversations with individual board members before you ever go before the board as a collective. In an ideal world, that is taking place, because you're going to find that some members of the board are incredibly business focused and understand the cyber and the technology stuff this much and the security stuff this much. You may have that one random member on the board who's super duper security focused. Maybe they're a CISO from a bigger company that's on your board because your board happens to be one of the ones that really has stepped up their cyber game. Maybe you've got a risk committee that isn't necessarily cyber savvy, but they're very risk savvy. Every board is different, and they may have committees, and they may have individuals, and they may have whatever their agendas are. You need to get to know them all, learn where they're at, learn what they look for, learn what formats even they expect. Find out from other peers how they present to the board and what has been successful and not. You may discover that you got a buddy down the hall in another department who went before the board with a heat map and just got the crap beat out of him because the board didn't want to see a heat map. And then he came back the next quarter with bubble charts and the board loved it. Okay, great. Put your stuff in bubble chart format, right? Like even the format matters. So find everyone you can who's already reported to the board, learn their hard lessons, free of charge, and have those conversations with the individual board members yourself. Get a feel for where they're at. Never, ever, 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 ever surprise a board.
Never, I'm writing it down, surprise a board. Those are words to live by. So now let's hard pivot again, cyber roulette. Losing sight of the backup plan. Huge issue cited in this article. I almost didn't list it in our discussion, but then I came back to it based on just a lot of things in our discussion here. The backup plan, security doesn't usually own the backup plan. But in a ransomware event, security is damn sure going to be held accountable or responsible for part of that recovery, which will be completely dependent on the backup plan.
Indeed. And
let's talk recovery and backups.
Yeah, we talked about the resilience thing earlier. We talked about the fact that resilience is more important in some cases than the initial. What was your other term? Resilience versus
resistance.
Resistance. Resilience is sometimes more important. Well, the backup plan is 1,000% a part of the resilience side of the fence. So I would argue the best way to solve that problem is you treat the cybersecurity organization as a stakeholder and customer. And you come to your providers of service. In this case, it's the IT team providing your backups. And you say, we're running a ransomware simulation. I need to see my backups and validate that they are both recoverable, accurate, and offline so that the ransomware can't get them too. Tabletop it. Run simulations. Be the customer who needs this. And if you work with IT and request this and IT doesn't give it to you, to your point, you don't own it, but you're going to be held accountable. I tried to get them to work with me. I've been doing this for 3 months, trying to get them to work with me, and we got busted. And it turns out, no, their stuff wasn't backed up correctly, or it was still online and got hacked by the ransomware as well, or whatever the story might be. At least you CYA'd. But the reality is we should never be focused on CYA as a motivator. We should be focused on doing the right things. And to do the right thing, you want to engage them as a customer and say, I'm your customer. I'm consuming your service. We're going to test that service next month on the 15th. Let's get together and do this. And schedule it. Work with them cooperatively. Run it through the paces and make sure it's real.
Keyword cooperatively, but there's another keyword that he used a couple times there that I don't think we talk about enough, which is validate. Validation is such a key component of a truly effective security program and a business continuity disaster recovery program. They should be validating too. But and every aspect of the business recognizes the need for validation, but frequently skips the step. Let's talk, just take backups off the table, expand to the whole program. Talk to me about what all areas lend themselves to true validation within a practicable security program, something that can actually get done other than backups, because I agree 100%. What else, if you have to prioritize, should you be validating next?
Simulated ransomware, simulated phishing, simulated attacks, breach and attack surface type stuff from the outside would be my big three. Now, breach and attack simulation, there's a whole industry around that. There's some highly effective tools. There's purple teaming. There's people, process, and technology, all that are ready for you to go if you want to do attack yourself and see how well you're doing. That whole world exists really well solidified. People, process, and technology, all three. The ransomware simulation, a little more nuanced, a little more tricky. It's a subset of that world that not everybody is prepped for. You may need to bring in outside expertise. And as to the rest of it, it boils down to truly, A, hack yourself, and B, tabletop exercises. That's what it boils down to. Test all the bad things you've identified as risks in your risk register. Back to reporting to the board. You should have a list of known risks your organization faces that would have material impact if the bad thing were to happen. And then you should be able to, as much as you can, not just defend against that, not just be resilient against that, but get to the point where you are actively simulating that and proving yourself worthy against it. And it should literally be your punch list of material risks you've identified to the board that you drive this through.
Absolutely. Hard pivot. I'm enjoying this, by the way. I normally pick a topic and run through it for the whole hour and plus, like you do, but I'm enjoying having somebody to be able to bounce all the ideas off of. And there's lots of folks out there who can. I just don't normally know that the chemistry is going to be there in that, so I don't always go this route. Although maybe this should be the standard for. So when I don't know if you watched our episode with Jim Motes, but that was a great discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Jim Motes is the CISO of GameStop.
Yeah,
and it was good times. He lives near you.
Yeah, he's up here. He's up here in DFW.
Yeah. So you'll probably see him before I do. Tell him I said hi.
I sure will.
So I think we're headed to something I'm calling the Great Consolidation, and that's just because I'm being flashy.
Okay.
The Great Consolidation is what I see as if there is a recession that really comes. A real recession, there's going to be a whole lot of fire sales on really good intellectual property. And that's going to consolidate a whole lot of, there's going to be a lot of merger and acquisition activity that's going to consolidate a whole lot of things. A lot of our audience is likely to be involved in that activity. I know you've been through mergers and acquisitions before. What kind of things should CISOs and maybe just security professionals in general think about when approaching M&A activity?
Okay. So I've been a CISO on an M&A team, which is a valuable and incredibly cool place to be. All too often, the CISO is brought in after the deal is largely inked, and as an afterthought, like, oh yeah, probably security, something. A CISO's real value to an M&A proposition is to be a forward observer and be engaged in the earliest moments when the first discoveries are taking place, because a CISO can ascertain what the security posture of the acquired entity might be, or the soon to be acquired entity might be, and actually use those results to drive down the cost of the M&A itself. So if you are an M&A entity and you are considering snapping up a bunch of smaller entities, get your CISO in early. You will end up buying at a discounted price based on the findings that CISO uncovers.
Absolutely. Let's drill down to the technical layer. There's going to be technical people involved in the acquired company. How do they work with the new company?
So there's what is the term they use? Integration terms. It's integration might not be the right term. I've been in that boat too. I've been. It
is integration. That is the right term.
Integration is the term. I've been in the acquired space and was actually part of the integration planning and teaming. Inevitably, you will have the technology team of the acquiring entity very quickly get in touch with the leadership of the acquired entity, and early on figure out, you got this and I've got that, and you got that and I've got this, and you do this and I do that, and kind of put together the master list, right? The CIOs and CISOs should literally have early on in the process a master list of, we use Oracle, you use SAP, we use this, you use that, all the way through for the tech stack, for the security tech stack, the whole shebang. And you should very quickly figure out what the business alignment goals are. And ideally, because you've already done this initial analysis, you can even shape what those business goals are. So you can come back collectively, the CIO and CISO leadership of the two entities can come back collectively to the deal and say, if we acquire them on January 1, by January 31, we can have email integration where all emails are flowing through a centralized email. We can achieve that. Next step, the sales, the sales databases, the customer relationship management, the CRM, whatever, database, we'll be able to integrate those by such and such. We're going to have to do a full scale conversion of this data from this platform to this platform. We'll have that done in X months. And you literally talk about what is doable and how quickly it's doable. Meanwhile, the business is coming back to you saying, oh, that's not good enough. I need this before I need that. Okay, then we'll come up with some crazy workaround. It's all dialogue. And the integration talks continue, and the technical teams are meeting long before the deal is inked. I was involved in M&A technical talks as an acquired entity, not an acquiring entity, but the one getting bought up. I mean, 4 months before the deal was inked, I was deep in planning conversations about the tech stack on how we were going to actually integrate and make these things go the way they needed to go. 4 months before the deal was inked, I was involved. That's probably a longer lead time than average. I think realistically, it's probably more like 2 months, but you get the idea. You at least get some lead time. And the technical teams get in there and do their thing. Let them do their thing. Let them explain what's doable on what timeframes. Compare that to the business ask. Work out the compromise plan and then execute.
Absolutely. I'm living this, by the way. You just described my entire journey. We acquired a company, as you know, in June, and we are going to be finishing the first major milestone. It's not the first.
Yep.
Right. The next major milestone here shortly of that integration process. And it's been quite a journey and a predictable journey.
Mm-hmm.
And everything you just said can confirm for anybody who's listening who might have thought, well, maybe it's not like that. It's exactly like that. Allan nailed it. So another hard pivot here. How prevalent? Because one of my articles here says it's highly prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
Or surprisingly. They didn't say highly. They said surprisingly. I shouldn't put words in their mouth. Right. Is the complete lack of a corporate security program. And I'm gonna say not at a small business, but at a medium to large business, like businesses that are approaching or past $1 billion valuation, revenue, whatever.
In the last 10 years, at companies ranging from 650 million to 1.4 billion in revenue, I was first CISO 3 times.
You do have quite a record of being the first CISO.
First CISO 3 times at 650 million to 1.4 billion revenue. That should tell you what you need to know there. Now, granted, this was over the last 10 years, and it's been 5 years since any of that took place. Presumably, that's reducing, right? Presumably, more and more of these companies have already had their first CISO by now.
So let's give those guys.
But that's an awful lot of first CISO just within the last 10 years. That's an awful lot of first CISO.
Let's give those guys just a little credit, though. How many of them had zero security program when you took over? Because not having a CISO doesn't mean security was completely neglected, in fairness.
Fair enough. We're going to have to get into the nitpicking about what we defined by program. In one of the companies, we had the security guy who did firewalling and made sure we had the antivirus. And he was the security guy. And that was pretty much the extent of the program at the time I walked in the door.
And for anybody who's again listening, there's a lot of hand-based air quotes happening right now. Keep going, Allan.
Right. So that was one organization. The other organization had a security program, but didn't have the CISO. To your point, there was a program, there was no CISO. So of the 3 now, we've got one of each. And the third one had something approximating a program. So maybe we'll call it 50-50 difference. So to answer your question, 50% had something I would call a program and 50% did not.
There you go. And when should an organization consider adding a CISO? Like at what point do you go from a security guy, air quotes, to a CISO?
So it all depends on revenue. It depends on deals. It depends on things like how often you're asked, do you have SOC 2 or whatever these other things might be. You can get by quite a while with a security guy as opposed to a CISO or security gal. We shouldn't keep saying guy. Could be anybody.
Guy is a generic term. We're going to define it as generic and non-gender specific right now. Right
on. All right. So you could have that person who isn't a CISO who's managing security for you. You could have that for a while. The irony is, like, there used to be this celebrity chef on TV. It was a cooking show on TV, and he was the Cajun chef. Mm-hmm. And he did all kinds of crazy things like cooking in Dutch ovens with coals, like he was a legit Cajun cook. And he had his whole recipe show about some dish he was cooking in his Dutch oven with coals. And he was like, how do you know when it's done? Because, with a Dutch oven, you dig a hole in the ground, you lay a bed of coals, you drop the Dutch oven in there, you put more coals over the Dutch oven. There's no cracking the lid in this scenario.
Best cobbler ever, by the way. For anybody who hasn't done it, best cobbler ever.
Yes. So he says, if it smells done, it's done. If it smells burnt, it's burnt. If it don't smell done yet, it ain't done. It's kind of hard to go any clearer on when do you need a CISO than that argument right there. Other than to say, by the time you feel like you need a CISO, I would argue you probably needed one 3 months before that.
That's fair.
That's the best answer I got for that one.
There you go. So here's one that I think is I don't want to say controversial, but I certainly don't understand how it made number 2 on this list. Failure to inform employees of threats. Very specific verbiage there.
I don't know that I need to run around informing employees of threats. And the reason for that is Chicken Little syndrome, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, etc., are negative drivers. And it's very easy to fall into that trap. If you're going to go to each employee and say, well, you today, you could get hacked because of a phish. And you today, you could get hacked because you left your key in your car. And, you know, and to walk through and tell everybody threat by threat by threat by threat where they're at. That's really more of a FUD conversation than it is a meaningful and productive conversation. However, back to that interview question of what's the difference between a threat, a risk, and an exploit. Do let them know what the risks are, and do let them know what their role is in eliminating, preventing, bypassing, mitigating risk. The biggest risks we face as a company are X, Y, and Z, and the things you can do to make sure those risks are just risks and don't actually ever become incidents and don't become real threats. They're just risks. The way to keep them in the risk bucket is by these positive messages that I'm now going to give you about the positive things you can be doing. It's not FUD, but it's achieving the same result.
Absolutely. And I would say, yeah, and that's why I went ahead and pulled this one off the list, is because saying threats instead of risks, it means that you have to tell them about, if you take it as read, you have to tell them about everything that's happening across the entire cyberscape. I'm not even going to say landscape, cyberscape in general, right? Which I intend to be more broad than cyber landscape or cyber threatscape, the threat landscape. It's so broad. So like a threat, it could be the same malware being used by 5 different bad actors. That's technically 5 different threats. Yep. We're not going to go say we are being targeted by APTs 1 through 73 with Ryuk ransomware. I'm picking an old one on purpose.
Emotet.
Right. Emotet. And they're gonna use something called TrickBot to make sure that that they really get the trifecta here, so that they can Ryuk us good. They don't care about that. What's the risk? The risk is that we have ransomware that could make it hard to recover from, that will jeopardize the business. And if we stay down longer than whatever our RPO is, right, where we are RTO, not, I said longer, so RTO. Right. And that's what makes this show challenging, is when you get to the end of the second drink, your acronyms start to suffer. So when you get to the end of your recovery plan, it's how long, the risk is how long can we be down and still be in business? Mm-hmm. Hey, everybody, we can't be down that long. Please make sure you don't click these links.
That's it.
So I want to flip it real quick. Ask me a question.
I'm going to ask you the transition from Deputy CISO for the state of Texas, one of the largest government entities out there in the United States. Big. There you were in charge of all kinds of big, important governmental stuffs. You mentioned research labs and all these other things at your disposal. People think oftentimes that government is underpaid, underfunded. Sometimes they actually have cool toys the private sector blows off. It's actually not as, because I worked at DIR too at one point in my career. So you had research labs, you had some cool stuff, you had a lot of responsibilities. You had vendors constantly coming to you, and we all have that relationship with the vendors coming to us. And it's like, oh, God, you again? And other times you're like, hey, this is a great idea. We'll cooperate, we'll coordinate, we'll work together. I think we can work a deal here. Now you are the vendor. Mm-hmm. What has changed in your brain?
Oh, man, there are so many things I didn't know. Being a continuous life learner, I wish there had been a way for me to be taken out of my role for 10 days, put in this role for 10 days, and educated on how things really work on the vendor side. That would have been so helpful. How the economics work, what margins mean, what they consist of, and how much actually goes to a bottom line of a given company. And this is from a government perspective, because keep in mind, as a government person versus a business person, and in many past lives ago, I was a business person. I worked in banking and finance and retail and Fortune 500 consulting. I worked at SAIC. I'll throw names down since I've had SAIC as a guest on my podcast previously. I'm an SAIC alum, so I've worked on the private sector side, but I hadn't worked at a level where I truly understood the things I know now. And if I had known the things I know now while I was in government in that role that you described, I would have been a better customer, but I also would have been able to tailor my asks a lot better. And I don't know how we can bridge that gap. I'm still noodling on that. You've hit on something very precise here for me. I'm still noodling on how we bridge that gap without breaking the rules, because there are, for anybody who's familiar with the space in government, there's a ton of rules to make sure that people aren't abusing the stewardship of your tax funds, which I took as a personal responsibility when I was in the government. And those rules exist for a reason, and they're because somebody abused that position of trust in the past. But if there's a way where we can really truly like put on a seminar, a CPE or something where we can tell with transparently the buying side, specifically the government buying side, how the selling side works, I think relationships could be drastically improved. And the government has in the past, I don't know, 5 years, done a good job of starting to put on seminars for the vendor side to tell the vendor side how the government side works. But the vendor side isn't doing the same. And if there's anybody out there, because on government rules, it can't just be one vendor to one agency. It needs to be a couple vendors to multiple agencies. So this needs to be a seminar. Maybe it's a conference presentation, Allan, since we work for separate companies and we're both on the air quotes dark side.
Right.
Maybe we find somebody else, a partner in crime, and we set up a conference presentation somewhere where both the private sector and government are present, and that's going to require some calibration, or we hit multiple. We go do a circuit real quick.
I've got some vendor homies that might be in for this. This is actually really anybody who sells to the government could benefit from this exercise, and there's
the government could benefit drastically from it. Like peel the lid back on how this side works. I wish I had known. So the transition for me has also been really good. I'm still here. I like working where I work. I'm very employable. I could leave if I wanted to leave, and I don't want to leave. I like it here. It's the freedom to move quickly is very nice. That's something you don't have in government. It's not like I'm in a smaller company. I'm not a small company anymore, but I'm in a smaller company, so I don't have the freedom to spend money like it's going out of style, but I can get decisions quickly. That part's really nice and has been a lovely part of the transition. But man, there are so many things I wish I had known in the past that I do know now about how this side works. And I think we should absolutely figure out how to put a session together, maybe multiple sessions together where we share that knowledge in a way that it might benefit. That could be cool. And that, this 2 hours session of hanging out and talking might have just produced something actually useful in terms of saving some people some tax money.
There you go.
Right, that we might actually do something there. Ask me another question. That was good.
All right, let's see here. Austin, how long have you lived in Austin?
I've lived in Austin since August 28th of 2016. Before that, I was in the Houston area for about 20 years.
Okay. I grew up in Houston, moved to Austin back in '89.
There you go.
What are the biggest differences between the two cities? And this has nothing to do with cyber. What are the pros and cons of each city very quickly?
Oh, man. Okay. So Austin is a city of 500,000 that happens to have 2 million people in and about it right now. Yeah. So that is a struggle. The infrastructure is not built to handle the amount of people that are here. And Houston is a city of 2 million people that currently has 4 million in it, right? It's crazy. They both suffer from that same problem. But when I lived in Houston and when I grew up in the greater Houston area, because I grew up in the country outside of Houston, north side, and so like I used to drive to the Woodlands, and it took 45 minutes to get there to go to the movies in high school. We would either go to the Woodlands or Huntsville, and it took about the same amount of time to get to both from where I lived.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to triangulate there without giving away very specific details of my life that to the broader populace out here. But the Houston area is something I think people neglect about Houston, is that Houston is a major, large, critical metropolitan area and it has literally everything you could expect from a major metropolitan area. It's just more spread out than most metropolitan areas. So anything you can find in New York, you can find in Houston. You just have to drive farther, because the Houston metroplex is 100 miles wide, and New York is what, 10?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. It's not as concentrated, but you can find everything. And that's something I have missed since I left the Houston area. Is the ability to find literally everything within easy finding distance, right?
Yep.
Austin,
I miss the same things. The restaurant choices are so much better in Houston than they are in Austin. They just are.
So much better. And please don't get mad at us, Austin. It's true, right? Houston
and
has
the Austin traffic. Forget about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just a matter of scale, right? There are millions more people in the Houston metro area than there are in the Austin metro area. And as weird and as cool as Austin is, it can never reach it isn't at the scale, and therefore can't reach the diversity of awesomeness that exists in Houston.
I actually read an article just last month that said Houston was the #1 most diverse city in the country.
Yeah, no, it is. It doesn't matter. Like I said, it doesn't matter what you're after. Houston has it.
Yep.
And I don't care if that's designer fashion or amazing barbecue. Sorry, Austin and San Antonio, breakfast tacos and everything in between. Houston has it. And that I do miss.
Yep, full stop. And we're up in DFW now after 30 years in the Austin and San Antonio area, again, out in the country in between the two for a good portion of that. It's the Austin traffic that ultimately drove me away. And now we're in DFW. So I'm up in the Northlands now, where it got to be -4 degrees 2 winters ago.
Oof. We got down to 7 degrees for multiple days in a row. But oof. That I know we talked about it when it happened, and it was rough.
That was definitely rough. Texas didn't plan on that one.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we are starting to wind down, my friend, and it's so good to see you.
Likewise.
And talk about things that aren't related to our actual day jobs, but are related to something I dare say we're both passionate about, which is improving and driving forward our profession, which is the thing that we shared, how we met. Turns out we have a lot more in common than that. And I just don't usually wear this hat out as a fashion statement. It is a functional piece of gear for me.
I sure appreciate it.
You bet, brother.
All right.
So with that, hey, last chance. I like to give every guest an opportunity to give a quick plug. Give us 30 seconds about why people should check out TrustMAPP.
TrustMAPP, 30-second plug. Cybersecurity performance management. We're the ones who invented it. There's a Gartner hype cycle now. There we are. Go figure. The fundamental idea is that CISOs have a difficult time getting in front of remediation quantification. Risk quant is a science and an art, and people have their disagreements. Do I do a 5x5? Do I do a heat map? Do I do Monte Carlo sims and Bayesian math, whatever else it might be? But remediation quantification is the missing piece that a lot of us don't have to very quickly say, here's my maturity level based on like a CMMI style audit. Here's my results of my various framework compliance type things. Here's my business objectives I've been handed, and here's my risk register. And to bundle all that up and say, you know what, my greatest hits would be to spend $100,000 here and $250,000 there and $50,000 there, and check these boxes, and I'm addressing these risks, meeting these business objectives, and driving this maturity score from this to that, and meeting compliance for these frameworks, all that in one tool. So that's what we do.
There you go. Hey, you know what I should do? Now give me a plug.
You should give a plug for Apollo.
No, you give me a plug.
I give you a plug.
Give me a plug. What do I do?
Well,
and if I don't like it, I'll have Mark cut it.
Apollo is your partner in crime for getting all your cyber stuff taken care of. These guys are going to work with you, and these guys are going to bring significant tooling, expertise, resources, consultancy to the game. And one of the tools they can bring you is TrustMAPP.
I was going to say, full disclosure, TrustMAPP and Apollo are partners, but that's not why or how this happened.
Yep. This is friendship.
That's right. Long-term, which is actually, I think, how we should close. Long-term relationships are something that we don't talk enough about in this business, but are the things that I can directly pin the majority of my success to. Long-term relationships are absolutely key. If I run into a problem that I don't know how to approach, I pick up the phone and I call people like Allan, and he does the same thing. You have thoughts to share on that as our closer?
Oh, no, that is exactly it. That is exactly it. I've got my Rolodex, I've got my Slack channels, I've got my LinkedIn connections. I've got a whole community that is graciously agreed to be friends and to ally with me through this journey that we're all going through together. We look out for each other, we help each other, we give each other advice, we can learn from each other's mistakes. Friendship is the single most important driving factor in this industry for me.
Absolutely, me too. Well, on that note, this has been Cybersecurity Distilled. Hopefully we helped you distill some of the complex things facing you. And if not, please send us an email. Let us know what we should talk about next. Thanks for joining
Texas
us.
Cities.
And the Texas cities. Amen. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to go ahead and sign off. We'll see you at the next one. And cheers.
Cheers.